Wouldn't you like to go for a ride with me? I'll buy you some ice cream.
Hi, Sally.
Do I know you?
I'm a friend of your mother's. She wants me to take you home.
If you're a part of Generation X, navigating everyday life is a risky adventure. From unsupervised outdoor play to questionable parenting practices, Gen X faced an array of alarming dangers that are now viewed with astonishment. In this exploration, we'll revisit the seemingly innocent aspects of Gen X's childhood, reflecting on the hazardous terrain they navigated daily. So brace yourself for a journey into the past as we unveil 13 terrifying dangers Gen X faced every day.
We think in a supervised playground, perfectly safe. But in other places, perhaps not.
Playing outside unsupervised was a hallmark of Gen X's childhood, providing a unique blend of freedom and adventure. Unlike today's hyper-vigilant parenting, many Gen X kids roamed neighborhoods, woods, and parks for hours on end without direct adult oversight. While this fostered creativity and independence, it also exposed them to various potential dangers. One difficult aspect was the need for constant communication. With no mobile phones, parents couldn't instantly check in on their children's whereabouts or well-being. Kids relied on streetlights signaling curfew. When dusk fell, it was a race against time to make it home. This taught Gen Xers to be resourceful and punctual, developing a strong sense of responsibility. Exploration, while exciting, brought its own set of risks. Kids climbed trees, built forts, and biked through traffic. Accidents were commonplace, and broken bones or scraped knees were badges of honor. This hands-on experience with risk and consequence shaped a generation that understood the value of resilience and learned to navigate challenges without constant supervision. Stranger danger loomed large in the Gen X psyche. While abductions were statistically rare, the fear was palpable. Parents cautioned against talking to strangers, and the milk carton campaigns featuring missing children fueled anxiety. This awareness, however, instilled a sense of caution and heightened situational awareness in Gen X, making them adept at assessing and responding to potential threats. Speaking of dangers lurking outdoors, here's an equally alarming threat that Gen X navigated daily.
Even though the number of people wearing seatbelts went up, there's no decrease in the amount of accidents.
So even though you're liable to £50 fine,
Yeah.
you're not going to wear them?
No.
During the Gen X era, one of the now terrifying aspects of childhood was the commonplace practice of riding in cars without seatbelts or proper child safety seats. Unlike the stringent safety measures today, many Gen X kids were perched in the back seats or cargo areas of cars, free to move around without the restraint of seatbelts. The lack of seatbelt enforcement was not due to negligence, but rather a reflection of the prevailing attitudes and regulations of the time. Seatbelt usage wasn't as widely promoted or legally mandated as it is today, and car manufacturers weren't required to equip vehicles with the advanced safety features we now take for granted. This meant families often embarked on road trips with children bouncing around in the back, blissfully unaware of the potential dangers. These car rides were a nostalgic mix of freedom and risk for Gen Xers. Unconstrained by seatbelts, kids could sprawl out on the back seat or engage in unrestrained sibling antics. It was an era where the journey was an adventure, filled with the anticipation of discovering new places and activities. However, the lack of seatbelt use also came with inherent dangers. In the unfortunate event of a sudden stop or collision, the risk of injury was significantly higher for unrestrained passengers. Yet, these risks were not fully understood or prioritized then, and the prevailing attitude was one of resilience. Kids often emerged unscathed from these seemingly perilous car rides. As our understanding of vehicle safety evolved, so did the regulations surrounding seatbelt use, leading to a significant shift in societal norms. Today, allowing children to travel without proper restraints is unthinkable, highlighting the positive impact of increased awareness and safety regulations on subsequent generations.
The photo has sparked some concern about unsafe biking going on in the city of Springfield. 22 News reporter Nick Oresco tells us what you should know before you get on your bike.
In the era of Gen X, riding bikes without helmets was the norm rather than the exception, adding an element of risk to the simple joy of cycling. Unlike today's stringent regulations, helmet use was not universally mandated, allowing kids to pedal freely without the encumbrance of protective headgear. This lack of helmet culture meant that a tumble from a bike could result in more severe consequences. Head injuries were a genuine concern as unprotected riders faced the brunt of impacts without the safety buffer that modern helmets provide. It wasn't uncommon for kids to engage in daredevil stunts or races without a second thought about the potential dangers they were exposing themselves to. The absence of helmets also reflected a different perception of risk during that time. While safety was a concern, there was a prevailing belief in allowing children to experience a certain level of risk and learn from the consequences. This approach contributed to the development of resilience and adaptability in Gen X as they navigated the world with greater personal responsibility. The freedom to ride without helmets fostered a sense of independence and adventure. Kids explored their neighborhoods and beyond on two wheels, with the wind in their hair and the thrill of speed propelling them forward. This unbridled joy and potential dangers created a unique blend of excitement and risk that characterized Gen X's childhood. Exposure to secondhand smoke was a pervasive and often overlooked danger that shaped the daily lives of many children during the Gen X era. Smoking indoors and around kids was not only socially acceptable, but also considered a common practice. This widespread exposure to secondhand smoke had significant health implications for Gen Xers. Smoking was integral to adult culture in households, cars, and public spaces. Parents smoked in homes and cars, and the haze of cigarette smoke permeated public places like restaurants and shopping malls. As a result, many Gen X children were unwittingly subjected to the harmful effects of secondhand smoke, increasing their risk of respiratory issues, ear infections, and other health problems. The dangers of secondhand smoke were not fully understood or acknowledged at the time, contributing to a normalization of this hazardous environment. Children were often present in confined spaces where adults smoked, and the prevailing attitude was that the impact of secondhand smoke on children's health was minimal. It wasn't until later years that scientific research conclusively linked secondhand smoke to serious health risks, prompting a shift in societal attitudes toward smoking around children. This exposure had long-term consequences, as some Gen Xers grew up with a higher likelihood of developing respiratory conditions and other health issues associated with secondhand smoke. The experience also influenced societal attitudes toward smoking, eventually leading to increased awareness of the dangers of secondhand smoke and the implementation of stricter smoking regulations in public spaces.
A summer danger you can't even see. Playgrounds so hot the swings and slides are leaving children with serious burns, and it can happen in just seconds.
In the Gen X era, playgrounds were adventurous havens that often lacked the safety measures considered standard today. Children reveled in the thrill of unsafe playgrounds, navigating equipment with little regard for potential hazards. The landscape was characterized by hard surfaces, towering structures, and equipment that would be deemed risky by today's standards. One prominent feature of many playgrounds was the unforgiving concrete or asphalt surfaces beneath swings and climbing structures. Falls were an inevitable part of play, and the impact on these hard surfaces resulted in scraped knees, bruised elbows, and the occasional broken bone. Yet these experiences contributed to the resilience and toughness that defined the Gen X generation. Playground equipment itself posed significant dangers. Tall metal slides, often scorching hot in the sun, challenged children to conquer their fears. The iconic merry-go-rounds, spinning at exhilarating speeds, became both a source of joy and a potential centrifuge of danger. Climbing structures lacked the safety padding in contemporary play areas, encouraging a sense of risk and adventure. The absence of stringent safety regulations allowed for a level of creativity and exploration restricted in today's playgrounds. Gen Xers climbed to impressive heights, hung upside down from monkey bars, and engaged in games that tested their physical and mental agility. The unstructured nature of play fostered problem-solving skills and a fearless approach to challenges. Despite the apparent dangers, many Gen Xers fondly reflect on their youth's dangerous playgrounds. These spaces provided a unique environment for social interaction, imaginative play, and physical activity. The experiences of navigating unsafe playgrounds contributed to the development of resilience, problem-solving skills, and an adventurous spirit that shaped the character of the Gen X generation.
He has some very important things to tell you. I hope you'll listen to him and remember what he says. Hi, kids.
During Generation X, many parents worried about the idea of stranger danger, making kids' everyday lives uneasy. In the 1970s and 1980s, people became more aware of the dangers posed by unknown individuals, especially due to well-known cases of children being abducted and the constant media coverage of such incidents. The abduction of Adam Walsh in 1981 was a particularly infamous case that fueled this fear. This tragic event not only affected the nation, but also led Adam's father, John Walsh, to passionately advocate for missing children and host the TV show America's Most Wanted. The Walsh case, along with other widely reported incidents, served as a chilling reminder for parents about the potential threats posed by seemingly harmless strangers. Media played a significant role in heightening the fear of stranger abductions. News reports, talk shows, and TV dramas depicted frightening stories of children being taken by strangers, creating a shared feeling of vulnerability. The well-known milk carton campaigns featuring pictures of missing children became a lasting symbol of that time, leaving a lasting impact on both parents and children. Due to the increased fear, parents and schools initiated educational programs to teach children about stranger danger. Kids learned how to identify potentially dangerous situations and were encouraged to seek help from trusted adults if they felt unsafe. The phrase stranger danger became widely known and reminded everyone to be cautious.
This man could tell you a lot about asbestos now. If only he'd known asbestos is so dangerous, he needed a respirator and other protective devices to be safe.
One of the lesser-known but equally alarming dangers that Generation X faced during their school years was the widespread use of asbestos in building materials, including educational facilities. Asbestos, a naturally occurring mineral known for its fire-resistant and insulating properties, was extensively used in construction throughout the mid-20th century, reaching its peak popularity in the 1960s and 1970s. Asbestos found its way into various school components such as ceiling tiles, insulation, floor tiles, and pipe insulation. While the intention was to enhance safety and durability, the consequence was that students, teachers, and staff were unknowingly exposed to this harmful substance daily. When disturbed or damaged, asbestos fibers can become airborne and pose severe health risks when inhaled. The health hazards associated with asbestos exposure became increasingly apparent over time. Prolonged inhalation of asbestos fibers has been linked to serious respiratory conditions, including lung cancer, asbestosis, and mesothelioma. Concerns about the dangers of asbestos in schools gained prominence in the 1980s and 1990s, prompting widespread efforts to address and rectify the issue. In response to growing awareness, regulatory measures were implemented to manage and control asbestos in schools. Many institutions undertook extensive asbestos removal and abatement projects to ensure a safer environment for students and staff. The process involved identifying asbestos-containing materials, encapsulating them, or removing them from school buildings. It turns out Gen X were not only exposed to the dangers of asbestos in schools, there's another layer of hidden perils that went beyond the asbestos-laden hallways and classrooms.
Union 76 Super, one of the best leaded premiums around. Now, still want to sell that car cheap?
Cheap? They don't make them like this anymore.
During the formative years of Generation X, a pervasive and largely unnoticed threat lurked in the most unsuspecting places: lead. Both lead-based paint and leaded gasoline were commonplace, posing a serious risk of lead poisoning for children and adults alike. Lead-based paint was widely used in homes, schools, and various structures throughout the first half of the 20th century. Lead paint's vibrant and durable nature made it popular, especially in residential buildings. However, as the paint aged and deteriorated, it released lead dust and chips into the environment. Children prone to putting objects in their mouths and playing on surfaces were particularly vulnerable to lead exposure. Leaded gasoline, another major source of lead exposure, was used in vehicles for decades. The combustion of leaded gasoline emitted lead particles into the air, contaminating soil and surfaces. This pervasive environmental lead pollution affected urban and suburban areas alike, with children playing in yards and on streets unwittingly coming into contact with lead-laden dust and soil. Lead poisoning can have severe and lasting consequences, particularly on neurological development. High levels of lead exposure in children can lead to cognitive and behavioral issues, developmental delays, and learning disabilities. The impact of lead poisoning became increasingly apparent as studies shed light on the correlation between elevated lead levels and adverse health outcomes. Regulatory measures were implemented in response to the growing awareness of the dangers of lead exposure. Lead-based paint was gradually phased out, and leaded gasoline was banned in many countries, including the United States, starting in the 1970s and 1980s. Efforts were made to remediate homes and environments with lead contamination, but the legacy of past usage lingered.
The girl in the pink shirt, that's the girl I was telling you about.
Oh, that's Sarah?
Sarah, so when are you going to post something new?
Anything you post online, anyone can see.
The advent of the internet during Generation X brought about a profound shift in how children and teens interacted with the world. Unlike today's generation, Gen Xers had limited awareness of internet safety, navigating the digital landscape without the comprehensive guidance that is now commonplace. In the 1980s and 1990s, as the internet began to gain traction, there was a lack of awareness about the potential risks associated with online activities. Children and teens were drawn to the allure of chat rooms, email, and early social networking platforms without a clear understanding of lurking digital threats. Parents, teachers, and society at large were still grappling with the novelty of the internet, often underestimating the need for explicit education on online safety. Cybersecurity measures and parental controls, now considered standard, were in their infancy, leaving young internet users vulnerable to various online risks. The lack of internet safety awareness during this period meant that children and teens were more susceptible to online predators, cyberbullying, and exposure to inappropriate content. The concept of stranger danger extended into the digital space without clear guidelines or education on navigating these virtual interactions safely. It wasn't until the later years of Generation X and the subsequent generations that awareness campaigns, educational programs, and legislation addressed the importance of internet safety. Schools began incorporating digital literacy into their curricula, teaching students how to protect their personal information, recognize online threats, and engage responsibly in the digital world. During the coming-of-age years of Generation X, the awareness of the dangers associated with ultraviolet rays and the risks of skin cancer was not as pervasive as it is today. This lack of awareness contributed to more extended periods of sun exposure without sunscreen protection, as the importance of shielding oneself from harmful UV rays was not fully understood or emphasized. In the 1970s and 1980s, the cultural attitude towards sunbathing and outdoor activities often leaned towards embracing a sun-kissed tan as a symbol of health and vitality. Sunscreen use was not as ingrained in everyday practices, and the potential consequences of prolonged sun exposure were not as widely publicized. Beach outings, outdoor sports, and leisurely days spent under the sun were common among Gen Xers, often without the diligent application of sunscreen. The risks of sunburn, premature aging, and most importantly, skin cancer were not at the forefront of public consciousness. The beauty standards of the time often romanticized the idea of a deep tan, and tanning oils were popular without the requisite sun protection. Sunscreen products were available, but their usage was not as routine, and their effectiveness was not as advanced as contemporary formulations. Only in subsequent decades did scientific research firmly establish the link between UV exposure and skin cancer, prompting a shift in public perception. We may have overcome that one, but how about the challenge of physical bullying that cast a darker hue on the landscape of those years?
Oh, there she is. She's such a loser.
I know.
What a geek.
In the formative years of Generation X, physical bullying was a pervasive and at times accepted aspect of the school and community landscape. While bullying has existed throughout history, the nature of physical bullying during this era often went unchecked. It was sometimes downplayed as a rite of passage or a normal part of growing up. In the 1970s and 1980s, societal attitudes towards bullying differed from contemporary perspectives. Physical aggression, such as pushing, shoving, or even physical fights, was sometimes viewed as a natural part of childhood or adolescent behavior. Schools and communities had varying degrees of tolerance for such incidents, and intervention measures were not as comprehensive or standardized as today. The lack of awareness and understanding of the long-term psychological impact of physical bullying contributed to a culture where it was often overlooked or dismissed as kids being kids. In some cases, adults might have seen it as a way for children to assert dominance or establish social hierarchies. The prevailing attitude towards physical bullying during this time meant that victims were less likely to receive the support and protection they needed. The concept of bullying prevention programs and the recognition of the lasting effects of bullying on mental health were not as prevalent as they are today.
I recommend that you don't leave a child alone in the kitchen. There are so many hazards, and kids can quickly get into trouble.
Child-proofing homes was not as prevalent or comprehensive back then as in contemporary times. The concept of child-proofing was in its early stages, and many homes lacked the safety measures and precautions that are now standard in households with young children. In the 1970s and 1980s, parents did not have the same awareness about potential hazards within the home, and safety standards were not as rigorously enforced. As a result, homes were often not equipped with the extensive array of child-proofing devices and measures commonly used today to prevent accidents and injuries. Common household items now considered potential dangers for young children, such as electrical outlets, sharp corners on furniture, and accessible cleaning products, were not always secured or restricted. Staircases were often without safety gates, and cabinets containing hazardous materials were frequently accessible to curious little hands. Car seats and seatbelt regulations were not as strictly enforced, and it was common for children to ride in cars without the proper safety restraints. The understanding of the importance of secure car seats and seatbelt use for child passengers has evolved over the years, leading to more stringent regulations and widespread adoption of safety measures. As awareness grew regarding child safety, especially with educational campaigns and increased access to information, parents began to embrace child-proofing practices more conscientiously. Today, child-proofing is an integral part of parenting, with many products available to secure homes and reduce the risk of accidents. Now let's shift our focus to another significant concern prevalent during this generation. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, kids from Generation X had the freedom to explore the outdoors without adults always watching over them. Unlike today's organized outdoor activities, Gen Xers often went on exciting outdoor adventures with minimal supervision. This led to both thrilling experiences and potential dangers. During those years, it was common for kids to spend a lot of time exploring nearby woods, building forts, and navigating local rivers. They didn't always have adults around, which helped them become more independent and resilient. However, this freedom had its downsides. Getting lost in the woods or along unfamiliar trails was a real and sometimes scary possibility. Finding the way back without smartphones or GPS devices required resourcefulness and basic navigation skills. Injuries from falls, encounters with wildlife, or other mishaps were common during these spontaneous outdoor adventures. Since there was no instant communication with parents, kids had to rely on their problem-solving skills or seek help from other trusted adults in the neighborhood. While these experiences helped build self-reliance, they also showed the potential dangers of unsupervised outdoor exploration. Despite the risks, Generation X's outdoor adventures created a strong bond with nature and a deep appreciation for unstructured play outdoors. As society changed, concerns about safety led to more organized and supervised outdoor activities for later generations, reflecting a shift in attitudes toward risk and adventure.